Hi, I'm going to be talking about staying compliant in the world of AI using Airbyte mappings. So, to start out, who am I and why do I have any business talking about this? I'm Teal Larson. I'm a software engineer on Airbyte's Platform Compose and front end teams. Platform Compose is in charge of making it easy to configure and monitor your connections, workspaces, and users. So we manage things like the connection setup flow, user management and permissions, and workspace management. Previous to joining Airbyte a few years ago, I was with another data movement startup in the reverse ETL space. So helping companies get their data where they need it in order to extract the most value out of it is something that I've been working on for quite a while. And so I want to start out with a little bit of a history lesson, taking a look at where we've come in terms of data movement in the last 50 years. I'll move fast, I promise. So, ETL is a paradigm that's been around essentially since databases showed up on the scene. Folks had data in multiple different spots, and they needed a way to get it into one unified spot, a database, in order to run queries on it and do analytics. And so what we saw was that folks would create these scripts to extract their data. Then they would run some type of business logic on that data in order to transform it into the final shape that they needed, and then would load it into a database. Over time, compute and storage both became much, much less expensive. And we found that folks really migrated towards this idea of ELT, where you still use a process to extract your data from wherever it starts out, and then you would load it in its raw form into a destination. Could be a database, could be a data lake, a data warehouse, etc. And then you would run some type of DBT or SQL on that destination in order to apply your business logic. And what we're seeing now is that there's this need for a sort of data refinement step that happens before loading that raw data. And we're seeing this in particular with AI related use cases. And it is actually related a lot of the time to compliance and security. And so, how has AI changed the landscape of the L and the T? Well, first of all, your company's most valuable data is your most sensitive data most of the time. There's a wealth of public data models out there and a lot of AI models that are trained on it. That's fantastic. What's going to set your company apart is the information that only you have. A lot of times, this may also be sensitive data that needs to be hashed or encrypted well before loading it into wherever you're loading it. It's not enough to say, well, we loaded all of our data into an S3 bucket and then we hashed and encrypted all of the sensitive fields. That's not going to cut it at all. There are also a lot of large data sets that are being moved around, and you may not need all of them. It makes sense to apply some degree of row filtering prior to syncing that data. And ideally, none of this requires adding an additional tool or layer to your stack. You should be able to configure this right where you're setting up the rest of your data movement. And so, what we've introduced is mappings. Mappings solve for these transformations or refinements while the data moves. You can hash and encrypt sensitive data before it ever hits your destination or goes anywhere at all. You can also rename columns so that the schema in your destination matches whatever you need it to. And you can filter out irrelevant, unneeded, or sensitive rows of data before they're extracted. To give a realistic example, here I have some customer data that I'm pulling from Oracle, which is a connector available with our Enterprise Connectors plan, and moving to an S3 data lake. And so what I've done is hashed all of the properties related to a customer name. I've also encrypted the city so that I can decrypt that later with a private key. And I've only included rows where the credit equals GC or good credit. I don't need to consider any of the bad credit customers. in this particular data lake. And so, in a little bit of a Julia Childs moment, I have already run a sync with this mappings configuration. And so, what we'll see is that, well, only rows containing GC for good credit are included. We'll also see that these middle and first and last properties are all hashed. And we'll also see that the city has been encrypted. So I can use a private key to decrypt this. Where does Airbyte mappings fit in with other tools for transformation? When would I want to refine my data with a mapping prior to moving it rather than use a tool like dbt or SQL once it is wherever I need it in order to apply different transformations? So you would want to use Airbyte mappings for things like security and compliance, like obfuscating sensitive columns. You would also use mappings for column level data transformation before your data ever hits your warehouse or data lake, and applying quick adjustments without having to write any SQL. You will still want to use a tool like dbt or SQL for more complex business logic type transformations, use cases where you need to aggregate data or join across tables. You'll still want to pull in a bit of a heavier lifting tool, and you'll probably want to do that once the data is already loaded also. But for those smaller use cases where Airbyte mappings can be helpful, you can use Airbyte mappings on Cloud for Teams as well as on Self-Managed Enterprise version 1.5 or later. I hope that Airbyte mappings help you and your business to be able to unlock the value that lies within your data. Thanks.